I'm Scott L. Miller. It's the 17th of June, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in León, Nicaragua, and we're doing a quick rebrand to Scott L. Miller is living in Nicaragua. So look as things start changing to that over the coming week. Today I am super busy because we had a power outage this morning, which is going to lead to one of the things we're going to talk about coming up. And I'm just really tired. It's a Friday. I'm recording this on Nicaraguan Father's Day. I've been spending the day with my kids and the power's been out some of the day. It's on now. And so today we're going to be answering some viewer questions. Coming up tomorrow, we have some cool footage of the parade, the desfile that went through town. So we're going to be out and about doing events tomorrow again. We've done the last few days. Today's going to be a Q&A. We're going to get to it right after the bump. Okay, our first topic for the day is how is the power there in Nicaragua? This came up just the other day, and generally we say, you know, the power's pretty good here, like it's really not much of a problem. And of course, as soon as someone asks that question, we have a power outage. So I want to address this a little bit because one, power outages here, probably like anywhere, seem to come in waves. It's not completely evenly spread out. So the first year that we lived here, we had a lot of power outages. And then after that, we had very few. And from time to time, we are now getting them again. And it's never so terrible as to be a major problem. It is very rare that we're experiencing them in such a way that we can't use the refrigerators or we can't pressurize the water system or whatever, but there are small accommodations that most people take in order to work through power outages, whether it's they have a generator, they have some batteries, they don't have anything in their life that really requires power, they charge up their devices a little bit, they use pressurized water tanks, or they have elevated water tanks, or they live inside the city with pressurized municipal water. Some of those things, most people do some amount of that stuff and mitigate power outages in that way. Something worth really noting, this is huge and people don't realize it, is that almost all cooking done in Nicaragua, of all cooking, is done without power. So like when we first experienced power outages at our hotel, our reaction was, what are we going to do to cook? How do we feed people? And they're like, what do you mean we don't use power for cooking? And you're like, wait, what? All cooking is done by gas. The stoves are run by gas, the everything. People don't microwave here. I mean, they have microwaves, of course. There's lots of appliances that use electricity, but they're all luxury items. They're not necessities. So when the power goes out, everything pretty much just continues on as it did, just darker, right? Like it's a little bit less convenient, it's harder to see. You want to make sure the refrigerator stays closed as quickly as you can, but that's about it. Like you're able to keep doing things. That's something that really hits you in places like the United States. You're used to all these electrical appliances that you depend on. When the power goes away, they go away. Wow, what are you gonna do? Here, a lot of people during the day don't use power at all, especially the poorer population who is only cooking, only washing up, only like they're not watching TV, they're not using the internet, and so they can actually go long periods of time other than their light bulbs going off. They don't even notice that the power's out. For those of us who use a lot of power, it can be a bit of a problem. Of course, you're going to lose air conditioning, but in a lot of cases, you don't need it. That's another discussion. We'll do more videos on that. You're not going to get hot water in most cases, but a lot of people choose to turn that off anyway, even when they have it. I'm constantly finding mine turned off because people don't want to use it. You're going to find, a few of these things. In many cases, it's as simple as having some batteries. For example, if I was working from a laptop and my internet stayed on, I would have no problem, right? Because my internet is up and I've got a laptop. My battery lasts like 10, 12 hours on my MacBook. And even if I don't have any other way to charge it, I'm gonna get through most of a really long power outage without a problem. The one that we had today went from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., which is really long. It's one of the longest I can remember in recent times. And as far as I know, it was not a predicted one. Sometimes they put out the schedules as extra and heroes. We don't always get notified. So this one we knew nothing about. It was a legitimate outage, I think, caused by the giant storm last night, and it took some time for them to repair it. So our power outage is a thing here. Overall, my impact in the last couple of years that I've been here compared to the same amount of time that I lived in the US just before coming here, my power outages in the US were much bigger deal. Much. Every power outage I've had in Nicaragua combined is not nearly as bad as a single one we had really close to when we left Texas. At no point here has a power outage ever been more than a big inconvenience. Sometimes it's a huge inconvenience and we're getting in a car and going somewhere, but when we had the major power outages in Texas, we were left unable to leave our house because our house was in danger because of the power outage. We were going to have pipes freezing. The house was going to, we were going to lose control of the house. It required every bit of effort and planning and engineering that we could muster to keep the house from freezing and flooding. That's not the kind of thing that happens in Nicaragua. And that was long periods. That one outage was still more than every outage we've had in Nicaragua combined in time. So every minute of that outage was an emergency. Here, every minute of an outage is just an inconvenience. There, it was much longer. Here, it's much shorter, but it happens more often. So is it a real thing? Yes. The power does go out. The power goes out most everywhere. I've never lived anywhere that the power doesn't come and go. It's amazing in this day and age that better power deliverability isn't something we've tackled as a society. We sort of are, and we're tackling it by putting batteries and generators and stuff into individual homes, which feels like a weird way to go, but it's what's happening. But that's the kind of thing you have to determine what your needs are for electricity and mitigate them as it makes sense. And for a lot of people, it's as simple as, oh, if I'm going to have a day without power, I'm just going to grab my laptop and go to a cafe and work. No big deal, right? Oh, I have to go at night and it's really hot. I'm going to go somewhere and use AC. That little bit, that may sound like, that's a lot of money or a lot of work, but we're talking about once or twice a year. And if you were to put in a generator, for example, well, that's going to be a minimum of about $500. You're going to need batteries to get you through until the generator. So it may $600 or $700 total. Well, that could be 2 or 3 or even 4 years of mitigating power outages, and in ways that are flexible and don't tie you down, and that save expending that money until much later, and maybe can be written off in a different way. So it's sometimes mitigating disasters is cheaper and more effective than avoiding them. And in the case of the way that we have power outages here compared to the way that we have them in the United States, in my experience, is here mitigating them is generally really simple. You can drive to where there's power, you can have your own generator and get around it really easily, and some of those things you can do in the US as well, but often not as conveniently. And the areas that tend to lose power in the United States are much larger, so the ability to simply jump in the car and go somewhere with power often isn't realistic. So I hope that answers some of that particular question about how power is overall. The power is quite good. It is far from perfect, but we're quite happy with it. And while today was a day without power in the morning and I had to work around it some, it also never got beyond just being inconvenient for me. So that's about that. My second question that I'm going to be answering is, what about, because I did a number of videos about 3 to 4 days ago about business in Nicaragua, and one of these questions was, well, okay, but what if I only want to make enough to live off of as a business rather than, making a bunch of profits? So we're going to step back and say this all again, because I know what's happening. Everyone is missing the basics of how business works, probably because you're not coming from a business background. And this is everyone asks these exact same questions. So it's not picking on the people that are asking the question, right? This is everybody has the same reaction. And so let's step back to the high level. Should you open a business in Nicaragua if you need any money to come from it? No. You may notice I don't have a bunch of, but what if this, what if that, what if this? If you need there to be money being generated by the business, should you have one in Nicaragua? No. That is the answer. Everything else we're going to say is going to only explain this answer. It is not going to find loopholes to it, right? Do exceptions exist to this? Are there people who have made money by investing in Nicaragua? Yes. Are there people who are able to invest today and still make money? Yes. Does those facts that it can happen mean that you should do so for that purpose? No. If you think it does, that means a gap in business logic that should warn you not to start a business in general. I'm a business advisor, this is what I do, and one of the things we constantly have problems with is the people who drive business are often not coming from a business training background. And one of the most important things you do in business is having the financial and logic reasoning training to be able to say, okay, just because someone got lucky doesn't mean that this is a good investment for me. If I need money, I need to do something that's reliable, it's going to pay the bills, whatever. And doing this the thing we know, the thing that I'm driving home, that no discussion we have is going to ever change, is investing in Nicaragua a reliable means to paying any number of bills? No, it is not. You could find a way with your money to do that some other way without whatever you're putting into Nicaragua. You could put somewhere else and have a higher reliability of paying more bills. Okay? So the question is, what if we only want to make enough to live on? So we talked in the other videos. If you haven't seen them, go back in just a couple days and watch those. We have a lot of business videos. I need to make a playlist for business videos because there's a lot of similar overlap, and we could have this playlist that people can just go through, which they probably should, right? You really should go through a lot of the same, like, okay, here we're building on this, and people are asking similar questions or different or related, but definitely different, whatever. In this case, right, we say that the normal business is going to absolutely lose money. In order to stay open, you're going to have to pay the business just to remain a viable business. In the majority of cases, that is what you're going to do. The same can be said in the US. So this is not something about Nicaragua. It's not shocking. The average business is going to fail, and if you don't just close its doors, you have to pay to keep them open. Okay, the next level is if you're kind of successful, and this is the vast minority, the vast majority will fail and or you have to pay to keep it open. Then there's this sliver of ones that break even. They don't lose money, but they're not making you any money. They're just hanging on. Of course, they have the possibility maybe of making money someday, but not as high as they have the chance of losing money someday. So you generally, if you're breaking even, don't want to keep the doors open. Again, unless you're a hobby and the purpose is willing to lose money because it's fun to do. Okay, both of these first categories, the fully failed and the just clinging on, they're okay as hobbies as long as the amount of money you are losing or risking is worth it to you because the ownership of the business or the products of the business are so valuable to you as to make it worth those things. Would you lose $10,000 a year in order to have this private restaurant that you can eat at? If yes, good. If no, shut it down, right? That's what we're talking about. Now, the next tier up, it makes some profits, but not enough to pay you a real salary. This is where, it's bringing in a little bit of supplemental income. Maybe it brings in $300 a month of relatively solid profits, right? Like reliably. That could be a good investment depending on how big it is, but if you had to put $100,000 into making that, no, that's a terrible investment, right? That is not good at all from a business perspective. That means your money would have made you money somewhere else. You didn't need to have a business and take on these risks in order to make that money. So it's still a horrible business. It is an absolute don't do it business level. But if you do it, it still could make money, and if you already owned it, that money would help supplement your living. It's not enough for you to live on, but it's enough to supplement. Remember, you can't pay yourself. You have to make profits. Someone's going to ask, because they do every time, even though I just said you can't work for yourself. Someone's going to say, okay, but what do I have to do to work for myself? You can't work for yourself. Okay, you cannot work for yourself and be paid. You can volunteer for yourself under most circumstances. That is different. You can't actually work for yourself. You cannot be the employee. And what's the exception? I didn't list one, because there isn't one. Okay? Just gonna keep saying this. So everyone thinks, well, but I'm, okay, he said all that, but I'm gonna work for myself and it's gonna make enough money for me to pay myself a salary, obviously. No, not obviously. You can't do that. One, legally you can't do that, and two, financially that's not going to work the way you think. I know it feels emotionally like I'm leaving out something, like some magic, but you show up to work and you're just going to get a salary because you own a business and they just pay you, right? No, it doesn't work that way, right? The business has to declare profit, pay its taxes, and after it's done all that, then whatever money is left over could come to you if there's profits, and to get those profits to a number you could live on is wild success. This is the thing we're saying to everyone. There's almost, truly almost no chance that you are going to be the lucky one who can get to the supplemental income level. And if you can get to that supplemental income level, to get to that, it's able to pay all your bills level is a huge level of success. And that would almost certainly require a massive investment that would cause you to lose money, not make money. Yes, it may pay your bills, but only in a you're actually paying your own bills way. I don't know. This is quite literal. I don't know anyone in Nicaragua. Someone's going to come up with an example. Someone knows someone. I, as a business person here for years, who talks about this stuff, I have yet to encounter a person making this level of profits to call it a definite success in investing in Nicaragua. I don't want to dissuade people from investing in Nicaragua. I want to get people to invest realistically, to be investing because they want residency, to be investing because they want to run a hobby and it's worth it to lose money, to invest because they love Nicaragua and they want to create jobs. All of these are really wonderful reasons to invest in a hobby, to invest in a losing business, to simply donate time and money to Nicaragua, to the business, to the product that you want to make. And that is absolutely fine. In fact, it's altruistic and it's wonderful. But don't go in blindly. Don't let anybody lie to you, and most importantly yourself, that I'm leaving out some magic lottery ticket that you will always receive and always win, or almost always win. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the things that people are assuming they're just going to be able to do as if it's this easy thing, I'm going to make wild profits. And I understand that what they're saying is they're only looking to make enough to live on. They're not looking for U.S. salary levels, presumably. They're looking for Nicaragua solid salary levels. So we're going to say somewhere in the $2,000 a month range of profits. It's hard for me to explain the degree to which it is outrageous to think that after paying your taxes, you will be able to clear $2,000 a month of after-tax profits in Nicaragua with a business, and have done so while investing little enough money that you couldn't have simply thrown that money into an index fund and made more than $2,000 a month after taxes without lifting a finger. Okay, and that is your baseline. If you don't hit that baseline, you can't actually claim to have made a penny. Not profits of a penny, that you have been working for free all of your time and nowhere near profits. There's two different times that we look at profits. The legal one, which you have to do before you get anything, and the actual profits from your money, which we look at the end of the day. If this is a labor of love, if you don't care how much money you're going to lose, then this isn't a business question. And then it's, what do I legally have to do to donate this money to Nicaragua and just lose tons and tons of money? And lots of us are willing to do that. Lots of us want to do that. Lots of us are coming in with that in our minds. And tons more are coming in thinking that they see us doing that and imagine that somewhere we're making tons and tons of money from doing so, and that you can just open a business without doing the research, without understanding the math, without knowing the market, and somehow come up with these profits that none of the rest of us are seeing. Right? The people who are more knowledgeable than me, who have been in the game for decades longer than me, the ones who had more cash to put down up front, are in terrible shape, have lost so much money. There is exceptions, but I don't know them. There's exceptions, I have not heard stories of them. The most wildly successful businesses I know in the zone that I work in are all closed, closing, or desperately trying to sell. That's the only options out there. Right? Some have given up on being able to find a buyer and aren't advertising that they're for sale and just privately asking. But everybody is for sale. Everyone is feeling a panic that they have no idea when they're going to be able to make enough money to put food on the tables, and they're simply bleeding out of their savings. Some are bleeding faster, some are bleeding slower. Somewhere someone is simply not exactly bleeding, but not making the return that they should make if they hadn't done anything. But everyone's in that boat. So when you say, can you actually make enough to live on versus what your money would have provided for you had you not done it? The answer is no. There is no realistic chance that you're going to be the isolated, non-available example case of such wild success. And that's the thing. The way that it's stated, if you were to go to family and friends and say, I don't need to be wildly successful. I only need to earn enough for us as non-residents, as non-citizens, to live on. And family and friends would say that's very reasonable. That's so, like, you're basically just looking to work for yourself. That's, like, if you were to do that in the United States, it would still be a very, very, very hard thing to do. I can't stress that enough. but it would be doable. And people would say, yeah, if you really know your market and really have some solid investment, you can hedge and that is such a thing that you can do. Still hard. I know very few people who've managed to pull that off in America, and it's kind of the dream, right? So that is hard. Now come to Nicaragua, crank up the effort, crank up the hardness level from easy to super hard, and try to do the same thing. And then it's not just that I'm in America trying to earn this amount to live on. I'm trying to earn it in a market where I can't make as much, a market where I'm at a huge disadvantage, a market that's at its own disadvantage. And then the trick is when we say it to family and friends, we say, we're only trying to make this much. It makes it sound reasonable. But when you put it into Nicaraguan terms, the amount that you need to make is wild success. It is huge, huge profits. It's not impossible, but it is, you have to step back and say, wait, this isn't just making some money. It's, if I could so whoppingly crush almost every business out there in how well I do, would it work? That would be fantastic. And I don't want to tell you to absolutely give up on your dreams. I hate to be a dream crusher, but you have to be realistic. Can you come to Nicaragua with this view of, I'm just going to do some business, I'll figure it out when I get there, and it's going to make me so much money that I'm going to be happy living on it, and so much more than what I could have done with my money otherwise, just by throwing it into an account and letting it take care of me. The chances that that's going to happen are so minimal that we're not going to, I'm putting this out there, right? If anyone on this channel actually is making that much money and understands the math, because I'm going to ask you very specifically, how much did you invest? How long did you lose? Where are these profits coming from? And then show it versus an index fund and see if it's matching the do nothing, zero effort approach. Because I don't want anyone saying, well, I made $1 if they're not making $1 over that. And then if you do make $1 over that, we have to compare how many hours of labor you've done versus doing zero. That doesn't mean you don't like the labor and it's not worth it. We got to be realistic about those numbers. But if someone actually thinks they have an example of someone who's beating index funds by putting in labor and love and passion and expertise, and that they're making more money and actually showing a value other than the love of what they're doing, I want to know. This is the call. And if we don't get those examples, I think that'll prove the point. And if we do get those examples, I really want to know what they're doing. Learn something about that, because I am completely confident these people exist, but I am also completely confident that they are 1 in 10,000 or less. There's only a very small handful. And remember, this is about expats. If you have, like we have some people on the channel who said they have a successful business, not a wildly successful business, right? But they have a successful business that's worth the effort, making money, doing a good job. They are not expats. It's a business where at least one of the owners is Nicaraguan, and so they have Nicaraguan know-how, Nicaraguan connections, Nicaraguan tax advantages, Nicaraguan staffing. That is different, right? We're talking about expat businesses running legally, not doing something illegal or whatever. So that is the challenge, and that is my answer. The simple answer is no. We don't need to go any farther. No, you really can't do that. All right, next up on our questions is, can you get around in Nicaragua without very much Spanish? Or let's assume none. So the simple answer is, yeah, pretty much. And this is true almost everywhere. Now, I've not lived in places like, say, China or Turkey, where the language is really dramatically different, or Tanzania, right? But having lived around Europe and having dealt with languages like Greek, Ukrainian, Romanian, Spanish, French, Italian, in all those cases, living in a place where I didn't speak the language, and while I speak Spanish now, kind of, and while I speak Italian now, kind of, in all of those cases, at least some point, I lived in countries that spoke those languages and did not speak the language. So I have a lot of experience of actually living, not just visiting, but actually living in countries where I do not speak the language. In some cases, I don't even know the alphabet, or like kind of, but not like intrinsically. And in all those cases, getting around and dealing with stuff was not very hard. Now, partially that's a personal thing. I don't find it intimidating. I don't panic about it. I've done it enough that I'm like, yeah, this will be not a big deal. But it is important that I've been thrown into those situations. Greece is a wonderful example. There's very few people who spoke English where we were, so we really were having to deal with stuff in trying to read the signs and trying to just, it wasn't that bad. For the most part, people are accommodating. For the most part, you actually don't do that many things in life outside of work that require you to know the local language. Most times, restaurant menus are easily identifiable. If you, of course, now if we went back 50 years and we didn't have any of the modern translation tools, yes, it would be quite hard. But with things like Google Translate and DeepL, you're able to get by and understand nearly all words and phrases with minimal effort or with moderate effort, but it's really not bad, and it gets you far enough that's not a big problem. And of course you'll miss things, right? There's no question that there's going to be things that you're going to be intimidated by, that's a spider, and things that you're not aware of, and so forth. Those things will happen, but they shouldn't be reasons that you avoid going to a place that you determine to be a place you want to go to. In Nicaragua especially, people are super friendly. The country is very safe. You're not going to end up in a dangerous place or a dangerous situation because you don't speak Spanish. It's not going to work that way. It's simply the situations that may arise are there's conversations that you wish you could be a part of and you can't. That's by far the biggest. I find that sometimes things like trying to catch complicated buses, not the simple ones, not the Uca bus just going to Managua, not the Nica Expresso trying to go to the border, but when I'm like, oh, I want to go to this little village and then hop over to this little village and do this little thing, and I'm trying to do a tight time schedule, wow, if I can't speak Spanish, that's going to be so much harder or impossible. Those kinds of things, yes, they will hit you, but overall, you can simply pack up, and I'm working with someone who did this today, well, I guess yesterday, but I'm talking to him today, and he's like, yeah, it feels, people were definitely saying, what a crazy person moving to a country for the first time, never having been here before, never visiting it first, and moving with no Spanish. And that's an extreme case. But is he like concerned about it? No. Does he want to learn Spanish? Yes. Right? He's already like, okay, where do I find a tutor? How do I make that next step? And that's great, but he's not like, what am I going to do? I don't speak Spanish. It's not like that. He's able to get around. He's able to do things. You can point, you can count, you can use Google Translate, show people what you're doing, write things down, and really quickly you'll start picking up words and phrases and things. Like, oh, when it says se vende, what does that mean? Oh, it's for sale. You're going to see it 4 or 5 times, and you're going to be like, for sale. And that's just one, it's just going to build. So yes, you're going to learn, and that's part of the fun. But even if you somehow manage to never learn anything, you'll survive, and you're not going to be in dangerous situations. It will be annoying, and you'll probably end up having bilingual friends or staff who assist you with some things, for sure, if you're starting to do stuff. Now, if you're trying to run a business or anything, wow, you want us to be able to speak Spanish because you're going to be dealing with police, you're going to be dealing with licensing, you're going to be dealing with tax offices and all that kind of stuff. And that is going to be incredibly hard if you don't speak Spanish. But for living in Nicaragua, for touring Nicaragua, for just being a resident, you're going to be really good. There's going to be some moments, for sure, where you're like, oh, that was so hard because I didn't speak Spanish. But you'll be able to get through them. Right? Push through. A few moments that I know are tough are like if you have to do your residency interview, that's going to be in Spanish, but you'll have years, right, to prepare for that. When you go through immigration, it's really simple. You're mostly just handing paperwork back and forth and paying some money, but that's going to be in Spanish, right? There's a few things, and you're just going to have to, write down your responses, know what you're supposed to do, ask some questions beforehand, be patient, be friendly, don't get aggressive, don't get frustrated, just be like, please help me, I'm doing my best, right? Memorize some phrases, write some things down, show people, have translate, and you're going to be fine. But for sure, learning Spanish is going to mean you can just go out and be a part of conversations. It's going to be easier to meet people. Now my Spanish is to the point where I'm starting to meet people on the street, a lot of times because I'm filming, and it's really easy, or it's starting to be easy, that I can sit down and just have conversations. And I go out and hang out with friends all the time who do not speak English, and now that I speak quite a bit of Spanish, it's still a struggle, but we're able to carry on conversations and talk about different topics and, just have conversations, and that has leapt forward the Nicaraguan experience for me, and I'm sure it will for you too. But the bottom line is, don't let not knowing a language make you fearful. That is really not what it's like. There will be moments of discomfort, certainly, but really quickly you're going to be like, oh, I'm going out to a restaurant. You'll start forgetting that you don't speak Spanish, even when you don't speak any. Like if you start speaking Spanish, obviously you'll forget because it may no longer be true. But if you sometimes you just go to restaurants and really quickly you'll be like, I'm just reading the menu. There's no, like, I'm not confused or whatever. Like, this is just normal. Oh yeah, that's Spanish. I'm doing this in a different language. Wow, right? So I think that kind of gives the answer, but as you learn Spanish, any language where you live, you're gonna get more and more out of the place that you're in. In some ways, coming and not speaking the language gives you an advantage that you have time to ease into different aspects of society. That may actually be a good thing in some ways, that you come in and you kind of stay apart, but you have reasons to start integrating slowly. Instead, if I was to move to Canada, my accent is really close to Western Ontario. I can kind of just go out and be like, hey, yeah, I'm not really from here, but it's actually a little bit more awkward. I don't have enough of a barrier to make it interesting. People will be like, yeah, I don't care, right? But here I go out and I'm like, I'm trying to speak Spanish. People are like, oh, you're making an effort, man. That's cool. We'll make an effort too, right? So it gives you a reason to try to integrate with people, it makes putting in that effort make a little bit more sense. All right, our next question is, do I feel that San Juan del Sur is a good example of gentrification in Nicaragua? And this is a really interesting question, actually, and I think that the answer is going to be a little bit surprising for those who don't know. San Juan del Sur is the largest and by far the most developed of any coastal port in Nicaragua. It's not technically the largest by population, but it is certainly the most urban. There are larger ones on the Caribbean, but they are very, very isolated and they are not built up in the same way. So they're slightly different in their makeup. On the Pacific coast, there is nothing that comes close to San Juan del Sur in population or in revenue or in services. It is simply the giant of the coastal communities, and it has become internationally famous over the last few years. It is very close to the Costa Rican border, and many of the popular beach destinations in Costa Rica used to be part of Nicaragua, and San Juan del Sur is part of that zone. So it's part of a very, very popular general zone between the two countries. So all that said, let's look at San Juan del Sur. Overall, we talk about how San Juan del Sur is outrageously expensive for Nicaraguans when you're going there. Hotels cost way more, restaurants cost way more, going out and getting drinks cost, just all the activities cost a lot more. And it is absolutely full of expats, especially Canadians, but also Americans and a lot of other nationalities, so much so that it is often considered an enclave or a semi-enclave, and the hills around it are full of very Western style construction buildings, often very beautiful, often very large. It gives absolutely a different feel than anywhere else in Nicaragua really does. You will almost feel like you moved to another country, and that is my video, The Two Nicaraguas, refers to the world of San Juan and its enclaves and the world apart from that in Nicaragua. So this must then be a great example of gentrification. The prices have gone way up. Nicaraguans would struggle on average. I mean, obviously many Nicaraguans could afford visiting San Juan del Sur and do on a regular basis. I'm gonna turn the camera just a little bit because I have this adorable dog hanging out in the yard, and why not include him? Always get more views and likes when I have the dog, and remember, like for more dog content. And so of course this is gentrification, right? Actually, I don't think it is. Or if it is on an extremely small scale. So a few things you have to know about San Juan del Sur. One is that while all those things we mentioned are true, all those things are very expensive, or relatively expensive, maybe not expensive for you, my viewers, but expensive for people who are living in Nicaragua. But if you're actually looking to buy a home in San Juan del Sur, which we did extensively, we did a lot of research on this and considered buying one, there's actually a lot of homes right in downtown and right against the water that are quite affordable. I'm not saying they're not more expensive than elsewhere in Nicaragua, but the amount that they are more expensive is actually relatively small. It's much smaller than you would anticipate. And the reason being that very few people actually, as a percentage, want to live in San Juan del Sur in general, and very few of those who want to live in San Juan del Sur want to live in traditional San Juan del Sur, where the downtown is, where the buildings are, where the businesses are. Where they mostly want to live is up on the hillsides, where they are new developments that are being put in specifically for expats. Now, you can argue that that is good, bad, or whatever, but that is where people are mostly living. When we're talking about people going for expensive housing, the people that we're picturing with this, oh, these expats are moving to this expensive location and they're putting in these big fancy houses. Where are they going? On the hillsides overlooking, and sometimes even other beaches. They're getting farther and farther out from downtown, to the point where being downtown almost leaves you out in the cold and not part of San Juan del Sur culture, the culture that we think of as being San Juan del Sur. All right, I like the light better over here now that he left. So obviously that's not entirely true, but it is certainly kind of true. If you want to live in San Juan del Sur and get the experience that people think of as the expats living in San Juan del Sur, you don't live downtown, you live farther out, and that makes for a very different experience. So if you end up living in the San Juan del Sur that Nicaraguans think of as San Juan del Sur, the village that has been there for hundreds of years, you actually aren't in the space that Americans are picturing most of the time. There's exceptions, but in general. So this is important because this is different than gentrification. Gentrification refers to when an existing location that used to be affordable, it could be low cost, we often look at it that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, but was an affordable location that had traditional neighborhood values, becomes desirable, and the rates go up as people move in, make improvements, change who's living in the neighborhood, and it becomes increasingly expensive, making it very difficult for the people who originally lived there to continue to live there. That's not always the case. There's some complications to the concept of gentrification, but you get basically the picture. If we were to truly gentrify San Juan del Sur, what we would expect is that the original village would become more and more desirable. Foreigners or Nicaraguans coming from, say, Managua, would come in with much more money than the San Juan del Surians who have lived there for generations. They would buy up the property. It would either become super expensive and buy and sell in that way, or it would become rentals that the rental rates were too high for the locals, whatever. That would be the expectation of gentrification. In reality, we've seen very little of that happen. To a small degree, what has happened is the downtown area has turned into businesses. That is not the same as gentrification, and that is a normal growth activity. But even there, we still find very affordable, and I mean very affordable, housing in downtown San Juan del Sur. Partially because that's not the desirable area. When people are raving about San Juan del Sur, that is not what they're talking about. So it's mostly still affordable and often has something available. So that's part of the reason, but we're not seeing those areas. When we looked at moving staff into San Juan del Sur not that long ago, they were looking at, yes, they would be only paying $200 a month in Matagalpa, and in San Juan del Sur they were looking at $260 to $280. That's a huge percentage increase, but it's not an increase to a point where you would consider it gentrification. It is not changing the aspects of the area to where the locals couldn't continue to live there. The locals are continuing to make higher rates than in the rest of the country because it's more expensive to live in the area in general, so they would see that as just part of their normal salary numbers. And of course, as San Juan del Sur grows, there are new expensive expat enclaves that are happening. There's also new affordable Nicaraguan housing happening. There are new communities popping up outside of San Juan del Sur proper that make it affordable for Nicaraguans who are working at normal Nicaraguan jobs, normal Nicaraguan rates for those jobs, to live and live just fine in the area. And so it's different than gentrification. It is not pushing the Nicaraguans out per se. It is providing new spots that are not gentrifying the old ones, but simply more expensive places alongside the non-gentrified ones. Of course, any individual block, there could be some gentrification or not. I'm not saying there's zero, but as an example of gentrification, I think it's safe to say that no, this is not what we're seeing happening in San Juan del Sur. And that's actually a really encouraging thing about San Juan del Sur, that it's maintaining a certain amount of Nicaragua, even though such a huge percentage of its economy and its population are not Nicaraguan. It's very interesting from that aspect. So that's actually a really great question. I like that one because it gave us something very different to talk about. If you are looking for gentrification, I think you will find that places like downtown Granada and downtown Leon and Los Robles and Bologna in Managua, as examples, represent maybe mild, but examples of gentrification where traditional housing that was more affordable, although it was never that affordable, is becoming increasingly unaffordable, and the people who are able to live there are, in some cases, still pretty limited, but in some cases, foreigners who are displacing longtime community members, and that's the real gentrification, and those will be a little bit more of a negative, but we're also not seeing it on a huge scale, so it's not as bad as it sounds. For our last question, another business one. Actually, I'm going to move a little bit. I need a little bit of shade. So we're going to pop right over here because that's ridiculously bright. We got to get to the point where, there we go. Now I'm at all right, perfect. So the question is, because it's so hard to run a business and make money, there was some brainstorming going on, and let's take this as brainstorming, right? So that's fine. What if, hear me out, we're going to put it up here. What if we loaded up a van in Nicaragua and drove to the US or Canada full of coffee beans? Would we be able to make money that way? Basically, using a theoretical lower cost of shipment to make it cheaper to get beans up there. So let's address this a little bit because this is really important. Okay, so I don't know. I have not done the research on how many beans you can fit into a van. It would depend on the kind of van you have. But you'd have to do quite a bit of packing to keep them protected and safe and whatever. You then have a number of challenges. The first challenge is the gas, which they mentioned. Less than $2,000 to do the trip. That is probably correct. You'd need to calculate in wear and tear on the van and any danger you would go through of that trip, because you're going through, while Nicaragua and the US and Canada are pretty safe to drive through, they're not the majority of that drive. The majority of that drive is several other countries, and they are the dangerous ones. They're not so dangerous that you should never drive through them, but they are dangerous enough that you should consider that in your calculations of cost. Anyone that's going to have to drive through them, for example, is going to have more complications. So let's deal with these things one problem at a time. This is all assuming that you own a coffee farm, you are producing your own coffee, and this is your coffee you are loading into a van, and you just load it in, and when it's full, you go. Okay, so this van can only hold so much coffee. First of all, vans are going to have limited strength, so it's not like you can physically pack it to the absolute hilt. It is going to be some lesser than completely full amount, but it should be a very large amount of coffee. Okay, so that is going to have to leave Nicaragua. I don't know that coffee is going to be legally allowed to leave Nicaragua. That is something you need to research. The research that it can come into the United States, not a problem, but normally the issue is that it needs to be taxed on export. So make sure you're aware of that. We're going to assume this is the easiest possible journey. So that means going overland from Nicaragua to Honduras, from Honduras to Guatemala, Guatemala to Mexico, Mexico to the US, and then potentially on to Canada. Of those, I do know that the border crossing from Nicaragua to Honduras is likely to pose some problems. The ones going into Guatemala, probably not, but may. The one into Mexico easily will. The US one, in theory, should not pose a problem. Each of them will, however, impose a delay. You will be searched. You may have everything emptied. You may be searched along the road. This is pretty typical as you are transiting. As a vehicle that is hauling a bunch of coffee, the standard is a multi-day delay at each border, at least through Central America. As you approach it, you will see a huge line of trucks. Now, those are bigger trucks than you're driving, so maybe you'll be able to bypass them, but that is a maybe. You're going to have to get to customs and explain at each border why you're acting like a truck but shouldn't be in the truck line. Good luck with that. Very likely, if you're like normal coffee shipments that are going up, they are required to be held at each of the ports. And when you do that, you will see these huge lines of trucks where people are stuck for long periods of time. That's a very big problem because you will have a driver who's not only doing this multi-day journey, because yes, we calculated the time of gas, and this driver could be you, but if it's you, you have to calculate the value of your time, and if it's someone else, you have to pay them. And if that person that you're paying is a Nicaraguan, they're very likely not going to be able to make this journey because not all these borders are going to allow them to cross under normal circumstances. So very likely you're going to have to pay an American, so you're going to have to be paying American rates, both for their time and for the danger and for any weights and anything else. So at each of these borders, you risk a day or two or possibly 3 that they are stuck waiting at the border, and you have to pay them for the day and pay for gas as the vehicle idles, which it won't idle all day, but it will from time to time because they're going to run air conditioning. They got to do things to keep the coffee from cooking in the van, and that is going to add up to massive expenses just in the waits at the borders. Then you have the actual transit time. It is about 56 hours to get to Texas. If you want to get anywhere else in the United States, you're just adding on more and more time. If you want to get to Texas or to Canada, you're adding like another 20 hours or so. So the amount of time of road time that you're putting in there is immense. You got to pay a driver for all of that time. That is several days. I know people who've done it recently, and it was it was a couple weeks. Basically, they assumed it was 2 weeks to get to the southern U.S. from down here. That is a lot of salary that you need to be paying someone. For every day that they're on the road, even if you could miraculously do this in 5 days, and there's a risk that it will take you 3 to 4 weeks, right? Because the person who did it in 2 weeks did not do it with a commercial vehicle, did not do it with a load of goods, did not have anything to go through customs, only had to drive their vehicle through. You have to pay for a hotel room and food and per diems and all that for someone every one of those days. And while yes, in theory, you can get pretty cheap lodging for this, you have to find someone who's willing to do the job, is willing or able to cross all those borders and willing to do so while in very cheap housing, very cheap hotels, and need to keep them safe, and so on and so forth. This cost is adding up incredibly quickly. We're talking about a very expensive journey. Now, let's talk about the van. Where are you going to get this van? If you're in Nicaragua, this is going to need to be a Nicaraguan placarded van. So if this is originating in Nicaragua, you have the problem that you as a tourist don't have the right to own a van. So you're going to have to form a company, and that company's going to have to own that van. If a company owns a van in Nicaragua, it cannot cross an international border, not even the Honduran one. So that's not going to work. So you're going to have to hire out a van, which is typically around $100 per day, that can cross the border. That will come with a driver, will also be very expensive, and they will have to drive you. So that cost is going to go up by thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars right away. Assuming you are able to get residency, now you're able to buy a van. So this will take you years potentially before you've established a business, put in enough money to justify being a resident, and now you're able to own a van yourself. Now you have to buy that van, that you have to consider the amount of money that's going into that, and then you have to maintain that van, which is generally a little bit expensive because there's not a lot of parts, and you're going to have to make sure it is then able to cross every border. This is done all the time, and people who have done it routinely say it's not worth it. This is a terrible experience. Every one of the borders has specific requirements for the drivers and for the payloads and the vehicles themselves. So you will generally have to import that vehicle into country after country after country as you go, drop off your load, and then go back through importing again to all of those countries except for the point of delivery. So if you're delivering to the US, you will not have to double import. But to Mexico, you will. You have to import in the south, drive it through, show that you're re-exporting in the north, and then import again, drive all the way through, and keep doing that at each country. That is a lot of paperwork, and each one of those import-export pieces includes fees. So there's a lot of potential expense here that is being hidden by saying, oh, you just drive it. This is not state to state. This is country to country in a zone. This is not the EU where a bunch of countries have a unified zone and you just pass the borders and don't pay any attention. This is like being in Southeastern Europe or in Asia or in North America or South America, whereas you go from country to country, each border crossing represents risk and cost and paperwork and time. And when you're shipping things, that's a big deal. So I think it's a great idea to think about what if we did this, but I think realistically you have to step back and say, whoa, there's a lot of problems with this, and it doesn't matter which side you bring the van from. If you're bringing an American van and driving it down to Nicaragua, you better be ready with that load, because if you keep that van in Nicaragua more than a couple weeks, it's going to hit all kinds of paperwork disasters, and now you've got to get it going back the other direction again, and then you're going to have a company in the US or something to hold that van and own it when you're not around and have all those taxes and fees. There's really no scenario that makes it super easy. There's some that are slightly easier than others. You'd have to play around with a lot of those things. Now there's the actual import-export of the beans. Leaving Nicaragua, I think you would run into some problems. Importing into the US, I believe you're probably okay based on things that I've read, but I'm certainly not an expert. But you're going to have to deal with the import and export of those beans in every country in between, and any one of them could pose a very high cost, and any one of them may pose a non-transit option simply because you're doing something in a way that they're not allowing, right? It may be that you're not allowed to personally drive beans. You may need a special placard. You may have to have a special license. Who knows? But that's a very real possibility. When you're dealing with commercial shipping, they're putting large amounts of beans onto pallets or into some kind of container onto very large trucks and paying a lot of money to take really large volumes through carefully placarded, carefully licensed commercial shipping and getting it where it needs to go. Or they're putting it onto shipping containers and putting it on boats and sending it and bypassing all those extra borders. In either of those cases, the cost that goes into that is used by businesses today because it's the lowest cost option. If you could make more money by putting things in a van and driving it, I guarantee that is how the universe of shipping would work, because shipping from Nicaragua is very difficult. If you could do that, people would. It's only because it is off limits and or not financially viable that it is not used every day. You do not see those things happening ever. You never hear about it. It's just not financially viable. And so that's, I think there's a lot of pieces that go into driving commercial shipments for import and export, especially of agricultural goods, over long distances where you're crossing a lot of international barriers that pose a lot of complications, costs, and risks that most people have never considered and have never looked at, and it would just never be something you'd take the time to be aware of. But as someone who has looked to do that drive, who has crossed many of those barriers, who've gone through a lot of those customs, I've seen some of those problems, I've seen some of those dangers, I've seen some of those delays. I know people who deal with it, and every time we want to just move a little thing somewhere, we have to face huge problems with import and export of all that stuff. So we're aware that these things are happening and that people don't have easy workarounds to them. Because if we could do that, if we could get an easy workaround to the problems we have here, we all know what the problem is. We all want to find a way to tackle it. And if someone tackled it, they'd have a gold mine, right? So it's one of those things where, yes, it's always great to think outside the box, but be aware this is well within the box that everyone thinks about and rules out because they've looked into it and said, whoa, there's all these pieces that are going to be outrageously expensive. And all of that that's assuming that you have the ability to drive. You're never going to be able to insure your load. You could insure your vehicle, you can insure your driver, but you'll never be able to insure the beans. No one will do that for you. So you're going to have to absorb any risk, and this is a very real risk, that you will be stopped, not in Nicaragua, not in the United States, but possibly in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala. Those are your risky ones. That someone may stop you and seize the beans along the road, or some portion of them along the road, leaving you with a partial or non-payload, and all of that cost that you will have incurred, you'll now need to drive an empty load back, having lost all that money, reload and start again. It wouldn't take too much of that to significantly offset any theoretical advantages you may have had by doing this, the inability to insure the riskiness of the scenario. Because you're a van, you're the kind of thing that gets hit by gangs who are looking to make some quick money by taking the payload out of a van. They're not going to do that very often with a semi-truck, and they're definitely not going to do it with a cargo ship. But when you do it in a van, you really are taking on some risks that are going to change the game. And you have to, when you're talking about making money by a regular process of running like that, you have to calculate that in and say, this is just, whether it's hitting 1 out of 100, 1 out of 500, 1 out of 20, you have to know what your percentage is so that you can figure that into, if your profits were only 10% and you get hit 1 out of 10 times, you're losing money, right? You're not making enough to pay for that lost load. If you have an accident, same kind of thing. What's going to happen? If you just have a basic repair, blow out a tire, well, probably okay there, but what if you had a broken axle? How long are you going to be delayed? How much are you going to have to pay for someone? You're talking about potentially rough roads. You're talking about potentially lots of empty space, and the risk just keeps adding up. I think the answer is that commercial shipping exists as commercial shipping for a reason, and it's going to be your best bet. If that doesn't make the product financially viable, it's not going to be financially viable through a really eccentric workaround. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. Get down in those comments. Ask more questions. Like, these have been really good. I love doing these episodes, and they help me on days where I'm really running behind and I need to be able to get something out quickly. Thank you so much for all of you who ask questions, not just the ones who get included on the show. I do try to answer. Sometimes it takes me a couple weeks. Often if I'm taking a long time, either I've missed it, that does happen for sure, and sometimes it's because I need to research something or ask somebody and I just haven't had time and I mean to get back to it. Sometimes I can't find it again. That's a real thing. Don't be afraid to ask more than once. Some of you do, and that actually does help sometimes, so thank you. But definitely leave your comments. Just say hi, whatever. Let me know about the bumps, whatever it is you like, don't like. You know, I do my best to keep adjusting and growing and getting better and improving. If you'd like to support the channel directly, you can buy me a coffee at the link above, buymeacoffee.com/Scott L. Miller. That comes directly to me and helps pay for the cameras and all that. There's a new Insta360 camera being announced in 3 days. I'd really like to be able to get it. I don't know what it is yet. Okay, I may have a camera addiction, but that I'd love to be able to get and just add to the show. I've been waiting for this. We believe it's the replacement to the Go 2, and I do have a new camera coming from my Camera Cafe channel, a Nikon D3000, which you're gonna say, what? That's the most boring thing ever. Trust me, it's gonna be interesting. We're gonna do something fun with it. All that's possible through Buy Me a Coffee. Please consider donating and helping making the show possible. If you are looking for assistance in moving, like the person who just moved here yesterday, and I need to wrap this up because I've got to get them to the beach, you can shoot us an email at info@relocatenicaragua.com. We'd love to work with you, whether it's something simple like just having a phone consult to tell you, answer questions for you or whatever, tell you information that you may need, all the way to helping you furnish your house and get your internet set up and all that kind of stuff. We'd love to help you with all of that. We offer those services. Shoot us an email. Like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show. Please post links on social media. Boy, does that help. Facebook, I don't even have. Get on Reddit. Let people know. That's how people discover the show. I will see all of you from the parade of the Gigantonas y Toros de Sutiaba mañana.